Welcome back. Today we're going to talk about how intensity really is your enemy in terms of your parenting and discipline. And that may sound funny to you because you may have been raised with intensity as the form of parenting. I certainly was, and many people that I know were too. So when you hear that, I think of things like people just saying no in an intense way, or kind of do it because I said so, or adding some emotional intensity to things to make kids listen. And the truth is, when you do that, they actually aren't really listening to your words anymore. What's often happening is as soon as you bring intensity into it, kids flip their lids. If you're not familiar with what I mean, I have a whole series you can watch of videos on flipping your lid. It means that you go into a fight or flight or freeze collapse state, and that your senses become very heightened for danger and threat. So you're not really listening to words anymore, you're just assessing for threat, because that entire region of your brain that processes language goes offline. So really it's not very effective at all. But you've all seen kids that respond to intensity. So for me to say it never works, that's not true. Of course it can work, but the problem is most of the kids that respond to intensity are kids that are going to respond to you anyway. And then the other kids that will respond to it are kids who they're reacting out of fear, but they're not actually learning anything. Their behavior won't change. It's just a fearful reaction. So if you want to have your kids really respond to your words, it's better if you actually don't go up but come down. So when I think about this, I think about the feeling of, what is it like? Think of if you ever had to go to the principal's office or the school office, and you got called down and you didn't know what it was for. Or maybe you got called into your boss's office, or maybe somebody who's really important to you sends you a message and says, hey, we need to talk. And then you get this sort of anxious feeling, this squeeze inside of you wondering about what it is, and you almost can't hear the words. You're just sort of figuring out, where is this going next? And then picture in that conversation that they're starting to set limitations on you, maybe about how your time is going to be spent or what you'll have access to. And then all of a sudden you really aren't hearing the words. You're just trying to figure out, what am I going to do next? How's this going to affect me? And that's what it's like for your kids when you parent with intensity. One way that I visualize this is I think of like a raging river that's flooding. And when I lived in Iowa for a while, every spring we'd have floods with the Iowa River, and it would come outside of its banks and kind of get all over the place. And when I picture that, and I picture that river all flooded, it would just sort of stagnate, and it didn't look like it was even moving anymore. And that is very similar to what it's like in a family where there are no boundaries or there's a lot of intensity. And so sometimes people will say, well, what am I supposed to do then? If I don't parent with intensity, do I just let them do whatever they want? And no, of course not. You actually do need very firm and consistent and predictable boundaries. That's going to give you the best results. So just like the river, when it's sort of all over the place and stagnating, it's like a family that doesn't have boundaries, and this river that's lost its banks, it's just not going anywhere. So a family can become like that as well. So it needs to be diverted. It needs banks built up again. And I found that that's actually what they did. They would get these sandbags and sort of build the banks taller to make the river divert and move. But as a parent, I think, but why not just build a dam there? I could just say no to things. I could just, when my kids are asking me for something, I can shut it down and say, no, we're not doing that. And that is very much like building a dam against a river coming at you. And if you do that, a lot of times they're just going to resist you. They're going to find a way to come over it or around it or just bust right through it. And it becomes just a confrontation and a conflict that's ongoing. So I find a better way is to take that energy that they have and then to divert it. Just like they do with the river in Iowa, they build up these banks and divert the river somewhere that they want it to go. So what you can do is actually it's very similar to the ACT model, if you're familiar with that. Or if not, I have a video that you can watch about that. you're naming the goal, what you see them doing. And then you're setting a limit, if there's a limit necessary, and you're helping divert that. You might give them choices, or you might put it back on them to think through what the choices would be, and then you're diverting it somewhere rather than having a dam be in the way. I remember a time I was in the playroom with someone who was building a wall out of these cardboard blocks and then racing cars into it to knock them down. And he was having a great time doing it, but one time he did it just a little too hard and the car punctured right through one of the blocks. And immediately he looked at me and I could tell he was expecting an intense reaction because that's the response he was used to, was intensity. Maybe I'd yell or say, "You're never using those blocks again," or something like that. But instead I did what I'm saying. I just labeled what I saw happening. Oh, I can tell you were hoping to really make that race through harder and knock those blocks down, but it looks like it punctured through that block. And then I'm setting the limit or making a boundary. And none of the things here are for breaking. And then I'm giving some choices. Now in his case, if he was younger, I could have said, you could choose to knock over this stuff or you could choose to knock over that stuff. But he was old enough that I could actually put it back on him. And so I said, I wonder if there's something you could build a wall out of that you could ram it through and it'd be fun, but nothing would get broken. Or that you could use something that would be okay to be broken. And he thought about it a bunch. And he came up with this cool paper wall. We started taping these pieces of paper together and taping them onto chairs that held it like a framework. And it had layers of paper. And then he'd ram this car through and it would get to destroy the paper. And he had a blast. So we helped him to achieve his goal of ramming that thing through. But it was appropriate. It was okay. And I set these parameters, these boundaries. He's not getting to do just anything. We're limiting it, but we're diverting it somewhere that's okay. So if I had just said, no more ramming cars into things, he may have responded out of fear, or he may have just kind of frozen, or he may have fought me on that, and it just could keep escalating. So instead of that, what you want to do is to kind of connect with them and then take it somewhere. So by labeling what you see, or even connecting with what you see they want to do. Boy, that would be fun to, run that car through those blocks and see them fall down. But none of them are for breaking. So you can choose to do this, or let's figure out a way we can do it that works. I hope that makes sense. You can certainly go back and review this video many times. It takes practice to get these things. This is not natural. The natural way would be for us to respond out of intensity. It just won't produce good long-term results in your kids listening to you. So I wish you all the best in this. Take care.